Segment 3, Gold and Black Live. The brains of the operation is on now, Ryan Neubert, and we appreciate his work. I don't like to embarrass my colleagues, but I just thought his work.
I do a good enough job myself.
I know, but I thought your summary of I learned so much by reading your stuff, and I thought that your upon further review from Marquette was, if you haven't read it yet, you should, because it puts it kind of all into perspective about what the Boilermakers are trying to get done and what they're not getting done. And I guess my first question for you, Brian, obviously we're down at availability today, so you've talked, I assume, to Matt Painter and or some players and an assistant coach, but 1 and 2, not shocking in my view, because you had 3 games, you had the last 2 games you could have won. We get that, but how do you put this all into perspective from the get-go?
I think it's the inconsistencies of newness.
Yeah.
It's the simple fact that, this was always going to be a process for Purdue growing into a good team. They have a lot of guys. They don't have as many new guys as they have guys who are now in very new roles. They're being relied upon in situations where they weren't relied upon last year. You have a new identity as a team. You have a lot of things you took for granted the last couple of years in terms of your offensive savvy, your offensive skill. This is not as good a passing team as the last couple, which is to say more that those last couple teams with the Dakota Mathiases, the Ryan Kleins, the P.J. Thompsons, players like that, were exceptional at it. This team has taken a slight bump down from an offensive skill perspective, something they have to grow into. I know they can shoot the basketball, but it's going to take them some time, I think, to coalesce offensively, to kind of develop that chemistry, to play to their strengths, so to speak, to fit into their roles, to not try to do too much, to not try to do things that maybe are not their strengths. And I think you see Purdue just undergoing some growing pains from an offensive perspective. Yeah. And I think that was always going to be the case. The fact that Purdue has put itself in position to win these last 2 games, I think, is a positive thing. The fact it hasn't is obviously cause for worry.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is why you can't start a second half well.
Yeah.
Is that concentration? Is that maturity? I don't know, but that's something Purdue's going to have to grow into. You are hearing the term concentration a lot, whether it was the bad turnovers against Texas, whether it was the free throws at Marquette, whatever it may be. If concentration is an issue, maybe this team at this point in its development is just kind of a spaz.
Yeah.
And just kind of has to get all that newborn energy out of its system, so to speak. But I still think Purdue's going to be fine. I still think they're going to be a good team at some point. It just wasn't going to happen from day one, and it certainly hasn't.
And they could be 3-0 if they catch, like you pointed out, if they just catch the basketball against Texas, and if they make some free throws. Because I think you're right. I think that the Marquette game, if it had been 19 at the half, which it should have been, or 21 or 23 even, might have been different.
Well, Purdue has a puzzling inability to finish at the rim.
Yeah.
Right now, I don't really understand that. That's potentially confidence, assertiveness, physicality, things that some guys on this team are growing into.
Yeah.
You're never going to be perfect on high percentage shots, even if they are high percentage. But your free throws, obviously, no one has to be told they need to make their free throws. Obviously, they have to make their free throws. If you're just mediocre at the foul line the other day, it's a very different ball game. If you're just a little bit better at the rim, it's a very different ball game. If you just have the awareness at this stage of your development offensively to recognize when Matt Harms has an advantage around the basket that you have to get the ball inside, it might be a very different ball game. Purdue missed him a number of times in the post, and that's, I think, you saw some signs from Matt Harms of being that guy that Purdue can build an offense around, and they just have to condition themselves to necessarily play to that strength. And that's something new because the guys on the team last year very rarely had to feed the post. They started doing it more, Travion Williams, but it wasn't their identity. You have a player also in Jahad Proctor, who's a very important piece of what Purdue's doing right now, who has never played with a good big guy before, by his own admission. So it's going to take some time here probably for Purdue to kind of figure things out. The good news is Purdue has direct frame of reference that November realities are fleeting. Because last year it was December, it was much later in the season that Purdue was in this situation where they'd lost a couple of games they could have won to high major opponents. A lot of people were saying, what's wrong with these guys? How come they can't win? Well, it's only November now, and they don't have to look back very far to recognize that these things can turn around and turn very quickly.
You look at the next two games, and Chicago State probably will be nice, be the most challenged team maybe to ever set foot in Mackey Arena, one of the most certainly. But the fact that you've got two games in the next two weekends with Chicago State and Jacksonville State to continue to maybe to build on your foundation, so to speak. I mean, how do you view that schedule? Because then it ramps right back
Right.
up again when you're down in Destin.
Right. Well, these aren't games Purdue scheduled. These are Emerald Coast Classic
Yeah.
on-campus games. So Purdue didn't go out and schedule Chicago State, and that's the sort of game Purdue is trying to do the best it can to get off its schedule.
Right.
Because when you play 300 level net rankings teams, that
Not good for the resume.
obviously hurts your resume. They had no choice in this matter. They signed up for the Emerald Coast Classic. You get those games that come with whoever else is in the event. So these games will not. Jacksonville State is much more credible than Chicago State is, but these games likely won't put Purdue back in the situations where it has not done well thus far. So I don't know if you really simulate the situations you need simulated here in the next couple of games. It may not until you get to Destin, where you get VCU and then either Tennessee or Florida State. But obviously, when things aren't going your way, a lot of teams just want to get right back out there. It will be a good gauge, I guess, if you want to take any value out of playing Chicago State, which is, as you said, the most challenged team maybe to ever come into Mackey Arena. It's a test of your concentration, I guess. And what did we
Can
just
you make free throws?
What did we just talk about?
fouled, yeah.
We just talked about, it's a concentration issue when you let the ball slip through your fingers at the end of Texas. It's a concentration issue when you miss free throws. It's a concentration issue when you have to turn around at 2 p.m. on a Saturday, 3 days after you lost a very close game. Not a very close game in the final score, but a game you could have won.
Close, though.
It's a test of your concentration to see how dialed in you are when you take the floor on a Saturday afternoon when everybody's asleep. Everybody just, well, obviously 2 o'clock. I hope they weren't just asleep, but I might have just been asleep. It'll be a good gauge, I guess, of their concentration level, of their seriousness, of their understanding that they can't take anything for granted because they're not good enough to at this stage of their development.
Yeah.
I guess.
Fair.
We have to say something about Chicago State.
All right, but leadership, and Matt Painter talked about it a little bit post-game, and I don't know how you really term leadership anymore because I still even look at the personalities on last year's team. You had guys that led by what they did on the court, Grady Eifert, Ryan Klein, maybe even Carson Edwards in his own way certainly did that. But this team, you talked about a little bit about what Matt Harms can bring just because they got to get the ball to him. But how big of an issue do you see that part of it in terms of, this is still a pretty young team with the exception of Harms. I mean, somewhat inexperienced. How do you view that?
Well, I think Purdue needs to get its two established players, Nogel Eastern and Matt Harms, into positions to be successful. And, that's not something that's happened right away. I know Purdue wants to put Nogel Eastern in some more positions to score.
Yeah.
He has to finish those shots. Obviously, the foul trouble really mattered against Marquette. But in terms of Matt Harms, I think you're seeing some signs of him being that guy, that foundational guy that you can build an offense around. But the thing with big guys is when that's your player that you want to feature, that everyone is there to feature them, they are relying on everyone else.
Yeah.
Whereas last year that player was Carson Edwards, to a lesser extent Ryan Klein, the combination thereof. Everybody just gave them the ball, maybe set them a ball screen, let them make a play. With Matt Harms, the people around him gauge how many good opportunities he gets. And when you go back and diagnose everything that happened at Marquette, you had a lot of guys around Matt Harms who were maybe trying to make plays that weren't theirs to be made, that weren't their strengths, who just flat out missed him at times.
Yeah.
And that's just something this team is going to have to condition itself to do, is, as Matt Painter said before, when you call a play to get the ball inside and you don't, that's a concentration issue.
Yeah.
When you're running motion and you don't get the ball inside, that's a recognition issue. You're not speaking the language yet, so to speak. And that's just something that's probably going to come in time. But I think one of the positive things that came out of Marquette was you saw a little bit in Matt Harms coming out where he wanted the ball in that situation. Purdue doesn't seem to have a guy who wants the ball in that situation. Matt Harms seemed to. Purdue does not have that guard on this team yet who is going to just get the ball and do something at this stage of their career. They might grow into it, but as of right now, they don't have that sort of alpha personality in that sense who's good enough at this stage of their career to be that guy. I think Matt Harms is the guy Purdue's going to need the ball in the hands of. I think you saw a couple of situations where he really wanted the ball. He was good when he had it.
Yeah.
He just didn't make his free throws. When Marquette doubled him, he handled it masterfully. And this is a player who has not faced double teams yet in his college career. That tells you he's prepared for what people are going to throw at him, and he's just ready to sort of be that player, but he needs help. He needs everybody around him getting him the ball in those situations. He needs the infrastructure working around him the way it started working around Carson Edwards about 13 months ago, whatever it was.
Yeah, no question. All right, well, Brian, thank you, and stay tuned.
11 months ago. That was
11
horrible
months,
math
that's
on my part, my fault.
Right, after December 15th of 2018 was where it started to go better for the Boilermakers. We'll see when that date, what the date is this year. All right, I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, On the Hill but on the Level, of Purdue tradition since 1929, Hilton Garden Inn. When tomorrow's a big day, State HDI tonight. State Farm agent Trent Johnson, who even sent us a question from Joe Barry today. Appreciate Trent and all he does for our show. And the folks at WLFI, can't say enough how much we appreciate Gordon Jackson, son Wes, always back there helping us out, and Scott Sumner as well, and anybody else that had a lot to do with this, putting this together. We will have a show next week. I'm really looking forward to that as well. We'll have Purdue sports psychologists on tomorrow, or next Friday on the 22nd of November, as Purdue prepares also for Wisconsin. And then we will do a show on November 29th, or at least that's the plan. Friday, Brian will be down getting ready for the Purdue VCU game down in Destin. We will talk to Brian via phone for that one, but that will be on November the 29th. So that'll be the end of our football schedule, and then we'll keep you posted on our December the 13th when we do that as well. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks also to Joe Barry Carroll for joining us as well, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week on Gold and Black Live.